Good evening. This is the United Way, the Talking Devils Tactics podcast. We're looking back at Manchester United 1, Fulham 1 down at the Cottage, and then we'll be previewing Burnley in the Premier League. We'll have a little conversation about Grimsby as well. As you can see, the retro game is strong this week. A little challenge from Tony and Mike put to each other last week off air, and they're both winning this week, although Tony did ask me to be the unofficial adjudicator or official adjudicator beforehand, and based on the technicality of Mike's the famous nature of Mike's shirt. So if you don't know, I'm going to give you the background before I introduce the guys this week. If you ever watch Premier League years or watch any coverage of United's trip to Selhurst Park in 1993, which is the one just before United won the league, we scored 2 goals in the second half. Everyone knew that Blackburn were Blackburn were battering Villa, and they knew that if we won, we were on the verge of winning the title. Well, when one of our goals goes in, Mike's one of the 50,000 people who were there at Selhurst Park. Oh, he's one of the 50,000 people who claimed they were there at Selhurst Park, although we've got the evidence of Mike because the cameras are on him wearing that very shirt. So, Mike, on the technicality, I'll give it you this week. How are you doing? You all right?
I'm good. Also had lots of big hair as well back then. No, I'm good. Result notwithstanding, not too bad.
Yeah, Tony, if it was a normal day and this was on a 1-1, like 1-1, and Mike didn't have his fame background, I'd give it to the shirt. I'll tell you why. I like your shirt. I've got this big treasure trove of these things. So Tom Tyrrell's tapes, which I'm still going through unbelievably, and he didn't like that kit. I'm not going to tell you the exact words, but we got tonked by Liverpool wearing that kit. I think it was 4-0 in one of the very first games we played in it. And there were some choice words for that kit. And I liked it, but it went up in my estimation after that because he really, really hated it. It was our first game. I think we got battered at 4-0 at Anfield. And then the last game we wore it, we lost 2-0 at Anfield when we threw away the title, which is... but we also won our first ever League Cup in it, so swings and roundabouts. I like it, and Tony, you still get the runners-up's not a bad place to be, considering United are usually associated with 17th place these days. How are you doing, mate? You all right?
I'm all right. Sat and watched, very frustratedly watched the second half against Fulham. So still kind of breaking that down in my head and trying to get around it and make it positive. As we've seen in our group chat, I was putting in who dropped points at Craven Cottage last season. So it was disappointing, wasn't it? Really disappointing.
No, it was, and it's funny because all of the sort of discourse has been, the drop points because first of all we were in the lead and we had the penalty. I did find it humorous to hear Marco Silva's comments coming out as though he'd beat us, and he's a skied penalty away from losing the game, and how good would his tactical approach have been then? However, you can't really argue with the point of what he's saying and how basic it was to play against United. And the weird thing is, we were all kind of positive last week after a defeat against Arsenal at home. We drove Fulham away, like you said, Tony. Like you were filling the group chat with, a lot of big teams didn't win there last season, but it still feels more deflating for us this week than it did last week. And I always start with we had a couple of points of conversation for this game, and the first one was one that I was. If you remember at the end of last week's pod, I was kind of like, I wish we'd been able to talk about this because I didn't think we'd be able to talk about it this week, but we did because he started Mount again in the false nine, or rather, Cunha was playing there as well. So one of the two were sort of flowing in there, and Bumo at times was moving into the middle as well. And Fernandes is meant to be disciplined and sitting the two, but because of the way that he plays, although he was a bit more disciplined this week, because of the way that he plays, there's the potential for him to move around with Mount and everything like that. And I thought, well, this might not be a bad idea in bigger games, or in certain away games, not the one at the weekend, but in certain away games. I didn't think that might be a good idea. didn't think it'd be a bad idea in theory that, that you have like maybe if it was Fernandes up top and you have Cunha and then Bumo floating around and then maybe Manu making up as the 4 and then you've got them rotating around, you kind of get away with not needing a striker if the movement's good and the penetration's good, because in Cunha and Fernandes, you've got 2 really good strikers at the ball. However, it didn't work like that in practice because we played with the midfield 2, and that's the real sticker in this. That's the way that he wants to play. He does midfield 2, as we'll talk about, have really defined roles. So Fernandes wasn't joining in, and it was left to the 3 to sort of do their jobs individually, and he just started well. But then went a little bit flat, like you said, most of the second half. You were asking what we were doing with that, and he eventually brings on Sesko. In fact, quite early on, brings on Sesko and sort of changes that system. Oh, what did you make of it? I mean, because everyone's talking a lot about his inflexibility and stuff, but I mean, he's playing without a recognised striker when we desperately needed one, enough to sign one for £60 million, enough to not trust what he's got. And then he starts with what he had. I guess the theory, Tony, might have been that we didn't lose last week's game on on the performance. We lost it on an individual error. So maybe he wanted to see how well it did in a team that wasn't against Arsenal. It was against a lower reaching team. What did you make of the way that we set up?
So the first 30 minutes, it went really, really well. Cunha hit the post. And what you were seeing was when Mount dropped towards the ball, their back line was almost stepping with him, and that was allowing Cunha space down the sides and in behind, which is what, if you want to call it a false 9, because that's trendy to call it that, basically you're playing with somebody who's not a recognised striker in the striker position, and naturally they're going to come closer to the ball to get on the ball, which is great and is fine if you've got a threat behind that when the striker drops, if the centre-backs come, you've got a threat going behind. And if you think of the great Barcelona team, which was the first one that we really recognise as having the false 9, you would have Messi kind of playing in there and he would drop in, and then you would have like Pedri and things running behind and stretching and finding the wee spaces. So in theory, we can play without a recognised striker. But when you play without a recognised striker, everybody knows that most of the touches that your striker's going to get is going to be in front of the back too. And if you don't have this threat behind, it makes it too easy. So essentially what I think we saw on Sunday was Fulham thinking, oh, what's this? A lot of rotation here, not sure about this. And then Marco Silva and his coaching staff and his analysts and whoever came up with a way, how do we stop them from being able to do this? But they just compacted the midfield and made the space between our midfield and our front players so big that the game then moved from their areas to our areas, and we just couldn't cope with it in the second period. And unfortunately, I think the result, most seasons a point away to Fulham's a decent point. I think we should obviously be aiming to try and win as many games as we can, and we've got a good record away to Fulham. It's the way that the game flowed that makes it quite deflating, because we started so well. Had we scored the penalty, we get a lot of luck, I think, with the refereeing decision for Yoro's header that hits the defender. You're 2-0 up. You can probably afford to drop off the game a wee bit and hit on the counter. And with Cunha and Mbeumo, you can really hurt teams with that. But that's not how it went. And I think there's a lot of questions about timing of substitutions, the nature of the substitutions, players playing in positions that don't naturally suit their game, and Mount being one of those. If he's coming to the ball, absolutely fine, you can link through him. But only if Bruno's coming to support and you've got runners behind. So that's for me, having sat and thought about it, that tactically, that's why it's so disappointing to see them play like that. Not because they didn't play with a striker or it's 57 minutes before he comes on. I just think the game had went away from the impact that the striker can have at that point, because Fulham had sussed it out.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. Mike, one of the interesting things to note with that was the fact that Fernandes was staying as disciplined as he could be, he wasn't making the forward runs. I think maybe that had been something that had been talked about last week. Even though I didn't, again, apart from the error to lead to the corner, I didn't think his actual in-game performance was pretty bad against Arsenal. I thought he was all right. But the weekend against a Fulham team that have not pulled up any trees over pre-season or anything like that. I mean, they're a decent side, don't get me wrong, and Silva's got them coached very well. But they're not. They've not kicked on, so they wouldn't pose any considerable threat. We would have thought that this is a really good chance for us to build momentum, and this is exactly what Amorim was talking about. Some of the performance looked like it would, and you have evidence there. The first 30 minutes of saying, all right, well, if we score a couple of goals, you can build that momentum. And football is so much about. I mean, we're talking about the tactics here, but I mean, football's so much about the human element of the role of momentum, even to the point of I was thinking before the game, we've won our last 3 there quite late on. We've not lost there since 2009. We've probably got 6 or 7 late winners there. There's a lot of late drama in there as well when we've not lost. Everyone remembers Ronaldo in 2007, and then Rooney had a late winner. There's a late drama for a draw one time, and then Garnacho, Martinez, Bruno in recent years we've scored. So I'm thinking, all right, before, not trying to be pessimistic or anything, but I'm like, we'll probably, on the human element of this, we probably are owed a result that's not going to go our way. But then you have the pure sort of statistical side of it. When you look at it, you think, well, United have everything going their way in terms of like the way that the match was going, and they couldn't grasp the nettle. They couldn't, put Fulham away, and Fulham reacted and responded. And like Tony was saying, they were under no real concerted pressure in the second half. They were very comfortable. United had a couple of moments where it looked like they might threaten, but there was nothing really. Nothing that screamed out to you in that last 30 minutes that said United are going to win this game. And that wasn't helped by the nature of the subs, the defensive subs that Amorim made. But obviously, one of the bigger issues, we just talked about the front 3 and the way that Bruno fit in with that. But as Tony was saying, it's about right players for right profiles. And one of the biggest issues was in midfield. Casemiro sits as a defensive midfield. I don't think you're going to have a problem with him. He was all right doing what he needed to do. He wasn't brilliant, but he's 33. He got an hour out of him. That's what he's supposed to get, I suppose, in the Premier League at this point. He's obviously going to excel in a 3-man midfield. You would say that. We said it last week. Every single midfielder that we've got would excel in a 3-man midfield. We bring on Ugarte to sort of see out the result. He really can't. He doesn't have the wherewithal to control the ball in a 2-man midfield, and he's not a good holding midfielder in the traditional sense of the word. If you think of the likes of Kante and Makelele, we're talking about players who are infinitely better on the ball than Ugarte. Ugarte is there as a spoiler to sit behind a 2 and in front of a 2. That's what he's there to do. He's there to win the ball in as ugly a situation as possible and pass it on as quickly as possible. You can't get away with carrying a player like that in a 2. And we'll talk about the concession of the goal in a moment, but I don't think it's any surprise that you've got Ugarte and Dalot. You brought them on to see a game out, basically, and United concede a goal from their area of the pitch. It starts again like last week. We talked about cause and where it starts and where it ends. There's no great error in there, but we can all see where it starts and where it ends. What did you make of, before we talk about the goal and the way we conceded it, because we got the slides to show, which Tony has prepared. What did you make of the midfield? I thought last week, we were having a conversation. It's passable. We looked at last season's games in the big games and said, all right, we've played most of these players in a 2, and it was passable, and we won big games or drew big games. So you're thinking it's there, but the evidence was there on Sunday that it's just not going to work in terms of consistently getting results in the Premier League, just as it didn't work last season. So, I don't know what the question is. What was your thoughts on the midfield mess on Sunday?
Just on that final point, there is a slight paradox there where we know United are not good enough at the moment to challenge for the title, but we are set up in a way in the big games to be able to compete against these teams that are going for the title. And that's one major factor is that they're going to go for the game because they want those 3 points. They're not happy for a draw. Whereas when we play teams who are not expected to go for the league or not expected to be competitive at the top end of the division, they may sit back more. They may play a little bit deeper, which means that United have to be more on the front foot. And I think that's where the issue was partly on at the weekend, where Bruno's our best player. Bruno Fernandes is United's best player, but where he's being asked to play is currently looking like a problem, because in the two that you said with Casemiro, his deeper position, it inevitably results in his best attributes being stifled. He can't be as creative. He can't take as many risks. He's certainly not a goal threat from that deep position. He's a number 10. We know that. He wants to play in that final third where he can take those risks, where he can be a little bit more creative, where he can be a goal-scoring threat. And because he's playing deeper, it actually harms the team. And the fact that, and I was surprised he didn't play Šeško. I mean, he's had 2 weeks with the team, 2 full weeks. It harmed Bruno even from that deeper position because he had no one to hit the ball to or to play off. So who was he going to play the ball to? And those 3 attributes that I mentioned, his creativeness, his goal-scoring ability, and his risk-taking, that has to happen higher up the pitch, not where he's being asked to play. And unfortunately, we'll see. We'll mention it as well for the goal. He actually lets Smith Rowe run off him, but that's not his natural game. His game is going forward. He is a risk taker. He's his stats. His GA stats say, he's naturally not tracking runners. Although we know he works bloody hard, and he'll run back, but from a forward position, not from a central deeper role to see right where's that guy gone and go with him. So I think that where Bruno's currently being asked to play is hindering the team. It's not in allowing us to flow further forward. And there is a massive gap between where we want Bruno to be and his ability on the ball and off the ball. And obviously Cunha and Mbeumo further up. That's a big issue at the moment. And Amorim has to solve that.
No, I completely agree. And I also think the bigger issue is that the players are starting to be made scapegoats when the system's there. You've got Bruno. People are now saying he can't play in the 2 ways. He shouldn't be playing there. Ugarte shouldn't be playing as the extra man in the 2 midfield. Casemiro shouldn't be asked to be doing what he's doing. And Manu should be in there. He shouldn't be getting no minutes. The system's just not right for the players that we've got. And I think there's probably better complements in the way that we've got there. And one of those complements would be moving Fernandes out of position and finding a different kind of solution. But he as I said it on the Monday morning podcast, that he just really likes Mason Mount. And I don't think anything that we were saying last week about Ugarte, what does he bring you when he comes on? What Manu can't do? What can Mount do in that position that Fernandes isn't better at doing? And what can't then subsequently Manu do in midfield that Fernandes isn't doing? I'm not saying that the results would be astronomically better, but I think they would be better. And I think we've got enough evidence of the past to see us that whenever you get a managerial change, they come in with their own ideas. Players get longer stays of execution. Some players survive managers at a rate that you just don't know how it's happening. Hello, Anthony Martial. But it has happened over and over again. And your favourites, like now, I'm not going to nail my colours to the mast, Kobe Manu, your favourites might get cast away in the same way that Johnny Evans was under Louis van Gaal, or in the same way that Danny Welbeck was under Louis van Gaal. I'm not saying these players would have gone on to be United legends, but when you look at who replaced them, who came in and what we ended up losing in terms of experience around the club and experience of the Premier League, you end up through these. It's like, I know Rashford's not everyone's cup of tea at the moment, but when he said basically stick with the transition, I think he was probably right in that. United do have to see that through. This one I'm not quite sure about, considering the level of the players again. Like in the same way that wasn't with Van Gaal. I agreed with the manager. I just didn't think that the players he was moving on were the right players to move on at the time. Anyway, we'll talk about Dalot now. We'll talk about the goal because, guys, there are over 400 of you watching this one live, and I would really prefer to be sat here talking about 3 United goals that we could pick the bones out of and talk about how intelligently we did. There's no point talking about a corner that was headed in and deflected off a Fulham player. We are going to have to, once again, look at something poor in United's play, and it starts with Diogo Dalot, Tony. So I'm going to pop up the first screen and pick through the horror of what we're watching.
Yeah. So the really obvious thing with Dalot is that the ball's cleared and he tries to take it on the half turn and give the ball away, which isn't ideal, but you can deal with it if you then deal with the subsequent outcome in the appropriate way. So you've got Timothy Robinson, the 33, I think that's his name, that plays for Fulham, who's passed the ball out to Calvin Bassey. Now, Dalot in that position should read that this is a right-footed player, or he's dangerous on his right foot, and he looks like he's going to try and come back inside. So where do I need to show him? I need to show him to the line to make it difficult for him. So I think Paul McGuinness, I coached for 18 years before I was an analyst in the academies up here. He used a lot of Paul McGuinness's stuff, and one of the things he talks about is defending 1v1. Your front foot as the defender should be in line with the furthest forward foot of the attacking player. That way, if he tries to cross with his left foot, you can block the cross. And if he cuts on his right foot, you can jockey him and send him back the way. What happens to Dalot here? Unfortunately, we're not going to show the video. We'll just have it in stills. The Fulham player plays a pass out to Bassey and then runs inside. And Dalot buys it, and Dalot goes with him. And you can see from the difference in those two screenshots that Dalot has opened up the opportunity to cross the ball. So if he had stayed in his position, yep, Bassey might have been able to slip that wee one into the corner, but then you've still got the opportunity potentially to recover. Yoro can slide out. Ugarte can go in and fill in for Yoro, and you can still deal with the ball. And ultimately, the ball is still in the wide channel. What Dalot does is he buys it, he sells himself down the line, Bassey cuts back inside, and obviously crosses the ball in. Now, for that position, what you can see on the edge of the box is what you were talking about, Wayne. That's Bruno with Smith Rowe. You've then got Dorgu picking up, Luke Shaw picking up, and De Ligt picking up. So if Bruno goes with his man, we should be in a position where we can deal with it. But as everybody knows, that cross comes in. Now, for me, De Ligt has to be stronger, has to come and meet the ball before it bounces. We're talking about real basics here, and Michael, back me up. You're talking about what you coach kids from 8, 9, 10, 11-year-old to jockey the space, close the space, show down the line, don't let crosses come into the box. And when the cross comes into the box, you cannot let it bounce. But we let it bounce. It bounces behind De Ligt. Bruno is caught by the run. Smith Rowe goes in and scores. And that, for me, is why that goal is conceded. Yeah, Dalot should just take the ball in, pop it back to somebody, and we're away. But we've all seen enough of Diogo Dalot to know that he's got a bit of the renegade in him at times when we've got the ball, and maybe thinks he's a better player than he actually is. And then defensively, 1v1 defensively, it's just not great. So probably the weakest 1v1 defender in our team is left in a situation where he has to stop the cross. And De Ligt is one I'm really disappointed in because he's got to take it before it bounces. Absolutely. I heard somebody talking about the goalkeeper. I can't remember where. Goalkeeper's no coming for that. It bounces at the front of the 6-yard box. There's nothing you can do about it. It has to be the defender that deals with it.
I was going to say about the goalkeeper, about binding on that, because of where it bounces. Is he just rooted on his line? Should he be, if he's another yard further out, he maybe can meet it before Smith Rowe does. I just think he's just too deep. I think that there's an opportunity there where how many times have we seen the goalkeeper come out and parry it, punch it, even catch it? I just think he's just rooted on his line. And yes, First of all, Dalot should have cut the cross out. De Ligt should have cut the cross out. But then once it gets into that, it's only 4 yards. Where it bounced, only 4 yards out. That's surely the goalkeeper's place to do something, in my opinion.
I don't know.
I watched it a couple of times. Watch it again, and I was just wanted your opinion. I just thought that once it's gone past those two, I just think he's too deep. He's just rooted on his line, and he just then a yard further out, he could have influenced Smith Rowe. Even just to come out, Smith Rowe may have, flinched and not got there.
I think would be Bayindir is obviously at fault for the corner last week, and I think we'd be verging into that might be unfair on him. See if you put the second slide back up, Wayne, which is just before he crosses it. We can look at Bayindir. So Bayindir for me, he's not on his line. He's a yard off his line. He's probably not expecting across to that front post area. If anything, he might be expecting them to try and swing it into the back post. If anything, he could be closer to his front post. That might help the situation. I don't think he can be further off his line because we're heading into David Seaman territory, where that one over the top of him is potentially.
I think he takes a step back, though. I think he does take a step back when the balls come in, but he's not at fault for the goal. I just would have liked my goalkeeper be a little bit more imposing and maybe correct the mistakes of his peers.
I think one of the prevailing points here, by the way, Rory's made a comment which I'm going to throw on it here. I think we're asking a bit much of Dalot here to be using his brain and knowing what foot an opposing player favours. We've seen it enough for 7 years now. He's not good enough and won't ever be. There is that, but I'll talk about this in a second. Tony's first point about Paul McGuinness, I've banged this drum so many times. This is a coach who should still be at United. Famously worked with the youth team, but yeah, like you said, everything he posts on, it's not just that he gets what United is. He's United. He's drenched United. He should be there. He knows how United teams play. He knows how to tap into the DNA. He should be there on the coaching staff with the senior players. That's my humble opinion on that. But I mean, the prevailing point, I do agree in terms of like a stronger goalkeeper should be there. But I also agree with Tony's point is that there's a discourse and a narrative around Bayindir. Now, you look at him and you say, all right, well, a stronger goalkeeper could have done better. Yeah, I agree. But then you've got this knock-on effect of we've highlighted 4 players who were there to blame, and we didn't even really talk about Ugarte being someone who could potentially be culpable because there's a passage of play before that which Dalot gives the ball away that starts that move, which is about 20 seconds earlier where they get the move early, and that's where I was talking about. We got Dalot and Ugarte there that they just can't hold the ball between them. And I think if you look back maybe 2 years, maybe the latter days of Ollie, certainly throughout the Ten Hag reign, what you had was a culture of me first, where the player would look to do what they want to do, but they would never. Their decision making would often be terrible. In that, like, if they were in trouble, they'd make sure that they were getting themselves out of trouble. It didn't matter what position the pass was putting their teammate in. If it was an awful position, because their problem was solved and their metrics, their numbers would have been fine because it didn't matter if they were playing a teammate into a difficult position. And if that player then lost the ball, we saw it defensively. There were many, many occasions of that, and it probably led to many goals being conceded as well. So we had that culture throughout the club where it's like, all right, I'm the one who's clearing my lines. My numbers are going to be fine. So as long as I'm not obviously at fault, then we can pick the bones out of the rest of it. And I think we look at the goal, it's almost like a sort of lingering product of that. Like you've got players there who maybe not more on Dalot than anyone else, is that he's done something, but he's not obviously at fault. He's not saying like, well, the goals come from him, but like as Tony's pointed out there, he's made the wrong decision and it's opened up a wave of trouble that United just couldn't get out of. So if there is a source to that, it is Dalot, because that's the one place where it should have been stopped. Everywhere else is debatable, where you go, all right, could Bruno have picked him up? Yes, he could have, but you don't expect that of a player. That's the mindset of a defensive midfielder to sniff trouble. That's the mindset of, we'd say, Ugarte. If he was a Kante, if he sniffed trouble in the same kind of way, then he's in that space already anyway. Someone who intelligent enough to sort of have the awareness to know where that problem is going to lead. instead of having too many players who were like, all right, well, I don't need this. I can step out of it. And as long as I'm not going to be to blame, and if it's not going to come back to me, like we said there are 4 players where that ends up. And that's a thing that's been at United so many times for so many goals conceded over the last 4 or 5 years. You can go back and say there's 3 or 4 players to blame for that.
I feel Delit, it bounces in the front area of the 6-yard box. That's your area, mate. So you go and clear the ball and you dig Dallo out for not stopping the cross. That's your job. But he gets too focused on, he wants to make contact with the defender, with the attacker. And what ends up happening is he makes contact with the attacker and the ball bounces at his feet. Whereas go and focus on the ball and just take the attacker. Go and take the attacker, win the ball, and take a big round of applause and stop the goal. You've got to sniff that this is a ball coming into the centre of my box. I've got to go and win it. Because I think I take the point with the goalkeeper if there was more on the ball. Like if there was more pace on the ball.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But I think the point you make about Delit is so fair and so right.
Yeah.
Anderven or Romero, they clear it. Van Dijk, Canate, they clear it. Yep. Right? You know, Saliba or Gabriel, they clear it. That's why they're winning games by one goal or keeping leads or keeping clean sheets, and why we're not at the minute.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Let's come through the comments here. Faux Shan, well, it's not really a comment for this kind of pod, but I'll just say anyway. Can we get a new midfielder this week? Hopefully. Right now, we've only got 4. Bruno's out of position, like we were saying earlier. Casemiro can only play 20 minutes. Ugarte is a CV liar. I like that. That's a good one. And Amorim don't just mean it. Yeah, we need another midfielder. That's true. Punjabi United. This is one we'll just address quickly before we move on to the next section here. My question is, even when Seshko comes on, why don't we cross the ball? And our transition is always so slow that we kill our own advantage. That is true. We were doing that often. But the thing I would mention about Seshko is that when you've spent all week practicing like we would have done prior to the Arsenal game, you've spent all week practicing to play in a very specific system where Mount is your focal point. That's the system that you're training to play. Then it's very different to then move to. I mean, we should be training for all manner of things, but that's the game preparation, right? You are practicing for Mount being in there. So when you are bringing on Seshko, what you're basically seeing is the practice in real time, right, Tony?
Yeah. Well, it's back to the very first pod we did. It's the 5 and the 5. So the 5 forwards are centre forward, Seshko. That's what you've paid the money for. Cunha and Mbeumo, and then the 2 wing backs. That's your 5. Should pin the teams back and allow your middle players to play. The problem for me is that we don't. Essentially, Marco Silva out-adapted tactically Ruben Amorim on Sunday. That's what happened. And he is so steadfast to stick to how he wants us to play that he won't adapt. Because for me, it was absolutely crying out for us having Bruno in a 10 sort of role with 2 up, the 2 wingers and the 2 centre mids. It's a slight adjustment to the 3-4-3, but all you're doing is you're moving Bruno closer to the area you want him to be in. But our coach doesn't see that, and I'm never going to come on this pod and shout for a manager to get sacked or say X, Y, and Z, because they're at a higher level than I've ever worked at, and they're there for a reason. But it is really difficult to sit and watch your team be tactically outclassed by another team, any team. It could happen. It could happen tomorrow with Grimsby. It could happen with Burnley. It can happen with Arsenal. I don't really care who it is. It's any team, because you can see it in front of your eyes, and you know that he's not going to change it, and that's really frustrating. And I think that kills. It's like you say when your point about what did we do all week? Well, for prepped for Mount, you can't play Seshko in there because they're 2 totally different players. Well, if you're saying this is my system and this is the way I'm going to play, doesn't matter if Mount's in there. It doesn't matter if Šeško's in there. It doesn't matter if Mike and Wayne are playing in the front three. It should look the same because you're telling us that this is the way to play and we're not going to change anything. So it's really difficult to sit and watch. I mean, a lot of my mates, I said it to you during the game on Sunday, you guys, a lot of my mates were like, just go and pay the money for Baleba. Just go and pay the money. Don't care what it is. Go and pay it because the problem is so glaringly obvious that there is a huge hole in our midfield when teams pack it out against us. So I'm not advocating that course of action because I think we've been in that position before where we've just went and paid the money and it's come back to bite us. But aye.
No, yeah, that's a good point. Rory says, sorry to interrupt there, Tony. Sorry. Rory goes, I think realistically the main point of focus for criticism needs to be putting two defenders like for like. When you're throwing the kitchen sink, you have to take a risk to win games like that. Yeah, no, I see where you're coming from, but I think he did the same with Maguire against Arsenal as well. And I think the idea is, not that I like the idea is that Maguire's an auxiliary forward until we score, and then he drops back into defence. I really don't like it, but I think that that's the rhythm of what he got into against Arsenal and against Fulham. And to be fair, against Fulham, it nearly worked, didn't he? He had that chance where he just went wide. And, maybe then we would have been talking about Amorim being a tactical genius.
There was a footballer called Gary Doherty. Do you remember him?
Yeah.
Centre back and striker. So that's the that's where we're at. We've got we're doing the same tactics that Norwich, Coventry, and Wolves were doing in the 90s and early 90s, sticking a big centre back up front, hoping he'll score, and then sticking him back because we want him to defend. I'm with you, Wayne. I don't like it. I just think we've got to be better than that. We have to be better than that. We can't be. Harry Maguire, I like him in terms of nobody will try harder. We've spoke about him before. Great in a 3, gets exposed in a 2. As honest as they come, everybody can see how hard he tries. I have to say, I was one of the Scotland fans in Hampden the night that he talks about in the interview, where it was really, really hard for him because he was getting it. And to be fair, he stood up to it. So a lot of respect for him. But we shouldn't be putting him up front to try and get us a goal when we've spent £200 million on forward players. No, that's a damn of the coach for me.
Play Šeško at centre back and put him up top. He did make me think then. Sorry, Mark, I wasn't being serious. I'm thinking your point there, Tony. Paul Warhurst was one, played in defence and striker, and also
Chris Sutton started as a defender.
Dion Dublin went into centre back plenty of times. So you never know. But he usually goes the other way around, right? A striker moves into defence. A defender moving into attack is
Ruud Gullit?
Ruud Gullit, he's another one. We have a few. All right, so we're not really going to talk about Grimsby. Too many changes, and I'll be honest, I do try and keep more abreast these days with much more about what's going on in Europe. So, we're looking for Senna Lemons, or I'll do my proper research on him, or we're playing teams in Europe. I'll go and have a. Berbatov did it as well. Bourbon there we go. I remember that. That's a good one. That was a flashback, that, Rory. So I do try and keep abreast of things. However, I will admit my knowledge of Grimsby is fairly limited. It's reduced to United's own history, so we're not going to talk about that too much. Apart from Mike's going to brag that he's going. And so really, Mike, to be fair, that's we know some United tickets, away tickets are gold dust, but that's one. Well done, Mike.
Yeah, shout out to my mate Chris who sorted me out.
Are you going to wear that shirt in the crowd again?
Maybe. I might wear this actually.
Yeah, wear that. Get a wig. If you're telling us your hair was big back in the day.
Yeah.
I celebrate just as you did back in 1993 if we win. Might do. It's been that long since we won. All right, so let's talk about Burnley away on the weekend. They've had a mixed start to the season, lost and won. I think they lost the first game, won the second game. Scott Parker, manager there. They got a couple of familiar faces. Hannibal's going to be playing, or maybe he won't be, but he's there in the squad at least. We talk about, talented midfielders losing their way and getting moved on before people wanted to see them go. Hannibal scores this great goal against Brighton and is promptly kicked out of the door. I would say even though there was a lot of talk about Hannibal and he is a great talent, I don't think it was quite as obvious like he was in the setup as Mainu was. Still disappointing that he went, but good luck to him back in the Premier League and doing all right for Burnley. Tony, okay, so you've seen Burnley start with two different tactical shapes, so let's run through them and what we're going to be expecting to see this weekend.
Yep. So no, that was
the last game.
Yeah. So the first one. So they started. I think it's Tottenham in the first game. Yep. So they started with 5-4-1, which I'll not run through the team. Kyle Walker playing as a right centre back, which takes a lot of his strengths away. I know we've seen that he's played in there for England, etc. But it does take a lot of his strength and his threat away from him. Don't like it, but I think this is probably what we'll see set up against Man United on Saturday or at the weekend. But the game that they won, totally different shape. So it was a 4-2-3-1. Again, we'll not run through the players, but Kyle Walker, right back, where everybody sees him. Brun Larson able to come in and drift. Hannibal playing in that situation, that kind of pocket where he can go and hurt teams. Yeah. And I think they've done a lot better. And this is the Burnley way that we saw them come back up through the Championship. Obviously, it was the same coach the whole time through the last few numbers of years, but I think we've all seen the Burnley documentary and we see the way they want to play. They play with two sitting, they play with three in front of that, and they try and play with one forward and they try and get up and pin the opponent in their half. I don't think they'll try and do that against Man United, but I think the most successful shape against the way that our coach wants us to play is a 4-2-3-1 because your wingers can pin our wing backs back into a 5. You can flood the midfield against the 2 because you get the 10 and the 2. You can even put your fullbacks in the middle of the pitch and make it a 5v2 against our 2. So if I was setting up against Manchester United, that's how I'd want my team to play. I'd probably play 4-2-3-1, control the middle, try and pin the wing backs back and make it really difficult for us. Whether Burnley do that against us or not, whether they're brave enough to do that against us at Old Trafford or not, we shall see. But it's certainly the way that I think they can be most successful, because I think if they go 5-4-1, we're going to have a lot of the ball in their areas, and you're going to then think about potential moments that people can come up with to hurt them. If we're going to spend most of the time in their third of the pitch because they drop off like that, I think we'll have better players 1 to 11, and we should win the games. Should win the game. So if I was Scott Parker, I would start with 4-2-3-1. I'd be brave and I'd try and do the things I just described. I don't think they will though, but we should see. I'll wait for my phone to start pinging on Saturday when they come out 4-2-3-1.
Talk us through the observations that you found on the screener that we've put up.
Yeah, so against Sunderland at the weekend, what you see here is you see Burnley, their kind of midfield pushing up to pin Sunderland back into their own box, and they want to spend areas there. So there you've got, I think that's Hannibal overlapping, Brun Larson going inside. So you've got that kind of number 10 running through. You get the two sitters in there, and you've got the fullback on the opposite side with your front players in the box. We see a lot of that, and that's the aim of what Burnley try and do to teams. They try and put them in their area, keep the ball, create opportunities to get down the sides, crosses, cutbacks, shots, passes to the edge of the box, little dummies and 1-2s and things like that. So these are the things that I observed just for watching the highlights at the weekend. Obviously, they were successful against Sunderland, but they weren't against Tottenham, and everybody can make an easy calculation as to why that's the case. But in terms of just the tactical outlook, I think Burnley will get more points in the Premier League this year if they play the way they usually play than if they try and turn up and spoil and make it difficult for teams.
Yeah, Mike, the one thing that was glaringly obvious on Sunday was that Fulham really didn't need to do much. It was a very basic way of eliminating the strengths or addressing and nullifying United's strengths. And like Tony's saying, there's probably a bit of an era of bravery coming at Old Trafford, right? You know, teams coming there not being too worried. So it's 50-50 on whether or not they'll turn up like that. And I probably agree with Tony that they'll probably go with a 5-man defence, and that could well win at United anyway. Considering the fact that no matter what, they'll still be flooding areas at United on best equipped to deal with, apart from on that one-to-one basis, like we were saying. And United only tend to thrive in the bigger games when those players have got individual instructions, like we were saying earlier. But against a team like Burnley, could well be a long 90 minutes. What are you expecting to see? Do you think, I mean, this is part of the course, we're not going to see Amorim change, are we?
No. No, we're not. And I like to think, I want to be quite optimistic. Whether they play, 5-4-1 or 4-2-3-1, they play 4-2-3-1 and sort of go for the game. That should leave more gaps for transitions. And we saw against Arsenal how Mbeumo in particular and also Cunha were able to get the ball, and the ball was switched very quickly, and we can attack from those flanks. If they go for a 5-4-1, we're going to have more of the ball. I like to think that we've got the better players in one-on-one situations to bypass them and get those goals. So I think whatever they play, I'm very optimistic. I think we should be winning the game and should be winning in it comfortably. My fear is exactly what you said, Tony, and how Fulham adjusted. And I think Alex Iwobi said it after the game. He said, we knew how to do it. We knew how to counteract it. We just put the extra man in midfield and we're able to have the ball more. Well, I hope that doesn't happen on Sunday and that we can be a little bit more pragmatic. But I think we've got far more match wingers where they play 5 or 4 at the back. I think we'll be okay on Sunday. That's what I'm expecting. I'm going to be optimistic.
Do you not think, Mike, on that point, it's Saturday, by the way. It's Saturday.
Sorry, yes, Saturday.
We'll definitely be okay on Sunday.
Yeah.
But Saturday might be a bit of a different one.
Yeah.
So, but do you not think that's one of the main points? That even though it's only Burnley, this is a really big test for Amorim in
Massive.
terms of how, potentially in terms of how he tactically, it might well just turn out to be a run-of-the-mill 2-0 win or something like that. Although he's not had one of those as United manager in the league, I don't think. So, apart from Leicester away, which is, said its own thing, Burnley will be tougher to beat than what Leicester were. Burnley at Old Trafford will be tougher to beat than what Leicester were on their own patch back at the start of the year. So, my point, Mike, is when you look back through the post-Ferguson era, I know Rennie Mullenstein was probably the one who started it when he was at Fulham. And he said something about how easy United were to deal with under Moyes because they were just crossing the ball into the box. He just said, well, they were just crossing and we knew how to deal with it. If you go through the managers over the years, the criticisms that we've had is that they've not mixed it up. Like Van Gaal didn't mix it up, and then Mourinho, we just said, he's just bringing Fellaini on again. Under Ole, we were saying he was too tactically naive. Under Ten Hag, we're saying he's not changing enough, and then he did change right at the end for the City game where he went with the 2 midfielders in attack, basically, and he won the game. It was tactically diverse from what he had been doing because what he was doing was flushing us down the toilet, and we're exactly in the same position again where we're talking about a manager being too tactically rigid, not tactically adaptable, and opponents coming out and actually saying that. So it is only Burnley, but it is you're still in the same kind of position where you want to see a manager be diverse enough to say, all right, he's tried something a little bit different. And it's not the kind of stupidly different like Harry Maguire up front. It's an actual tactic, a plan B that could operate within the system that we've got instead of being so rigidly stuck to this system, right? That's what we want to see on Saturday. That's one, apart from the 3 points, we want to start seeing that.
Or our players put the ball in the back of the net. If Cunha scores that 1-on-1, goalkeeper made a great save, to be fair. Bruno puts a penalty away, game's done. We won't be having this conversation. So hopefully on Saturday, the opportunities come, situations are created using this stubborn way of playing. But if we go 2-0, 3-0 up, game done, right? And we'll be, happy days. But you're right. It's when it's not going right. When is there a switch? Is there something different? It can't be Maguire. Xerxes on the bench. He's a centre forward. Mainu, great feet. Has scored how many late goals as a young footballer in his fledgling career. Yeah. So I agree with you. It's what is the plan B? What is next when it doesn't work out for whatever reason?
I think I'm with you. I think Tony would probably agree. Plan A, we want to see Plan A start working, and it could well be. And he did say this at the weekend. It could well be a case of confidence and momentum. Getting that early goal, if Cunha had scored that, the roof would have gone off. The one where, not the one where he hits the post, the one where he takes the touch and shoots.
Yeah.
Beautiful shot that. Niche fan says, I'm completely backing Amorim. I used to criticise his system, but I trust him implicitly now. His system isn't for changing. It will work. I'm with you. And Tony said this earlier, this is not a podcast where you're going to find people. We'll question the tactics and we'll talk about it, but we're never going to call for the manager. Dave might do that on the Monday morning podcast. He'll never call for the manager to be sacked, by the way, but he will say he doesn't have any confidence that he can succeed. It's a very distinct difference with Davo. I'm putting words into his mouth. On Monday morning, he might well be saying he should be sacked. I don't know. I might have been a bit too optimistic there with Dave. But hopefully we'll be back next week talking about 2 comprehensive wins. We'll be talking about tactical smartness and intelligence, and also Mike being on TV at Grimsby. Because that's the dream, right? No matter what else happens this week, we want to see Mike in Cleethorpes on television.
No, I want to see Mainu start and score a goal.
There's that as well. Well, we'll be back next week to discuss it, whatever happens, guys. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Thanks for tuning in and sharing your Tuesday evening with us. Really appreciate it. Stay safe, stay well, and we'll be back next week.